Our great farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace. All right, folks. This story has a great ending that just broke since we started the show, and so I'm going to leave Russell in suspense. But this has a great ending.
Oh boy.
Yeah, there's a great ending to this, and this is, the universe was kind to me this morning because there were so many stories. I was wrestling back and forth on what to cover as late as 10 a.m. I'm thinking, okay, what should be my last story of the day? I got all these things to choose from. I chose this one, and the universe paid me back. The universe rewarded me, so I know I made the right choice. So we're going to cover the LA riots, more from the standpoint of immigration and the economic consequences or lack thereof of these deportations. So here is a segment of Gavin Newsom's speech that he gave. It was only about 8.5 minutes. It was pretty short. We're going to play the first couple minutes of it. But here he is calling out Donald Trump for deporting workers and not just going after criminals. So he sets this up a bit, and then he gets into that part.
Federal agents conducted large-scale workplace raids. This past weekend, federal agents conducted large-scale workplace raids in and around Los Angeles. Those raids continue as I speak. California is no stranger to immigration enforcement, but instead of focusing on undocumented immigrants with serious criminal records and people with final deportation orders, a strategy both parties have long supported, this administration is pushing mass deportations, indiscriminately targeting hardworking immigrant families, regardless of their roots or risk. Donald Trump, without consulting California law enforcement leaders, commandeered 2,000 of our state's National Guard members to deploy on our streets, illegally and for no reason. This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk. That's when the downward spiral began. He doubled down on his dangerous National Guard deployment by fanning the flames even harder. He again chose escalation. He chose more force. He chose theatrics over public safety. He federalized another 2,000 Guard members. He deployed more than 700 active U.S. Marines. These are the men and women trained for foreign combat, not domestic law enforcement. Trump is pulling a military dragnet all across Los Angeles, well beyond his stated intent to just go after violent and serious criminals. His agents are arresting dishwashers, gardeners, day laborers, and seamstresses. That's just weakness masquerading as strength.
All right. So calling out the deportation of workers. And to back that up, here's some video. ICE raids at produce farms. Kevin Dalton, President Trump is going to clean up Gavin Newsom's lawless California, whether Gavin Newsom likes it or not. ICE makes early morning raid on produce farm in Oxnard, California. My nephew's 23, just graduated with a art history degree from Berkeley. He wants one of these jobs, and these goddamn immigrants are taking them from him. So let's take a look at some justice in the...
I mean, with the art history degree, this might be the best job available for him.
ICE agents arrived this morning here right around 6 o'clock in the morning. We don't know how many people were detained. One of the farm workers we talked to said ICE agents were chasing some of their co-workers around until they were detained. One of the workers described what he saw when they arrived to work this morning, and another one was talking about just the anxiety that how it is coming to work, not knowing if, in fact, Ventura County was going to be a target again for ICE agents. The sentiment here was they couldn't believe what they were seeing, but then again, they thought, not surprised that ICE agents were here. Now, in a statement released earlier today.
All right, so that's the scene at some of these produce farms, which seems to back up what Newsom is saying there. And obviously, the pretext for these protests were the ICE raids at the Home Depot, where they were going after the day laborers. So the Eugene Debs of her time, Batya Ungar-Sargon, your fighter for the working class here, Batya Ungar-Sargon, couldn't wait to write this article, Why Gavin Newsom Will Never Be President. And in it, she makes the point, she takes issue with this specific part of his speech. Governor Newsom said the quiet part out loud. Trump's agents are arresting dishwashers, gardeners, day laborers, and seamstresses. It was here that Newsom revealed that far from the solution to the Democrats' problem with the electorate, he is the epitome of it. For arresting illegal migrant laborers is exactly what many Americans voted for, an end to the regime of cheap labor that undercuts American-born workers. Contrary to what Democrats like Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass would have you believe, Americans aren't celebrating deporting illegal immigrants because they are racists. It's because they recognize the inherent unfairness of it, the burden it puts on them, the cost to their own families, something the elites are utterly blind to. And she went off on this CNN panel making many of these same points here.
According to a CNN poll, 54% of Americans, and according to a CBS poll, 57% of Americans want every illegal migrant deported. It's not a majority want the criminals, a majority want every single one. That is the mandate that Donald Trump believes he was given. Immigration was the top reason people voted for him. Kim Kardashian hates this because she is rich. Like the people who employed those nannies. Rich people are now the base of the Democratic Party. They are the employers of low-wage labor. They love illegal migration because they get to pay their nanny less than they would have to pay an American. So, of course, they are very upset that their jobs program of an open border is coming to an end. Working-class people see this as a lifeline because they are still represented as the majority in every industry. I just want to make that point. There is not a single industry in the United States that is not done a majority by American citizens. There is no job that is beneath the dignity of Americans. There are no jobs Americans
more
won't
Americans
do.
than there are.
So then why don't you go do them? Does anybody you know want to do them?
To play this administration like avatars of the American people is just absolutely absurd.
Right.
Okay, and I've said this before. I experienced loss of income because of immigrants who should not have been working in the industry coming into the industry. I've seen it happen to people I know in construction. I'm not saying that is not an issue. If this administration were doing this, and I would still disagree with the way they're going about it, but if they were doing this alongside increasing coverage and support for health insurance rather than trying desperately to cut it, if they were doing that alongside getting rid of tax cuts for their own class, hey, man, what if they gave all that tax cut to the bottom 40%? Then you could say, and none of that tax cut goes to the upper 20%. Then you could say, okay, they're making an honest effort to reverse the damage neoliberalism caused. But when you have in isolation and alongside everything else they're doing is aimed at destroying whatever support working class people have in this hellscape of a country that has a uniquely non-existent safety net, getting rid of whatever little crumbs people get, and you're doing this, well, then you have to call it a distraction from a real agenda, not an effort to elevate the working class.
Of course, but she will not stop doubling down on this. I mean, this has been her beat. This is her beat now, going back, the past few months.
That there are illegal immigrants, so that is also true.
It's insult to the American worker to say to them, these are jobs that Americans don't want to do, when millions of Americans are doing those jobs.
Like, there are more Americans in the country, so yes, there are going to be more Americans doing everyday jobs. I mean, it's an overwhelming number of Americans versus immigrants.
There's also tens of millions of Americans who've left the labor force and aren't working in the Trump administration.
Karen, a quick last word, and then we have to go.
Well, and I will just take us back to last year when we were talking about a town in Ohio where the president spread a false rumor about Haitian migrants eating cats and dogs, which was a total lie. And do you know why those migrants were there? Because the factories that were there could not find anyone to take the jobs. The white, no. The working class white, the working class white people wouldn't do the jobs.
For those wages.
No.
I don't know.
Wouldn't
I mean,
do- so
well, let me
they-
just
and
say,
they were
I don't
looking
I
for
don't know
migrant
that.
labor.
But what is Donald Trump? What is this administration signaling they're going to do to increase those wages once those immigrants leave?
Right.
Like that's a very key next
This is
step.
a party that's hostile to increasing the minimum wage.
Yeah.
That is very prone to making the argument, well, you increase wages for workers, these businesses have to shut down. This is their moral philosophy. This is their Randian economic vision. Look at the source. Look who it's called. No, she
What
is
Nick
just
said they're going to automate those jobs. He said it. They're saying they're going to automate the job. They're not making an argument for higher wages as a consequence.
Yeah, no, Americans are dying
deportations.
to work in the fields, to go work on plantations, pick strawberries. Americans are dying to do jobs like that. And Americans are dying to pay, even if she were right. Okay, so say you have to pay $35 an hour to pick fruit. How is the general public going to react to what fruit will cost under those circumstances?
Well, that's another thing.
Now you want to say, see, you're admitting it's about wages. Okay, yes and no. Like, I don't think you have a huge number of Americans who are going to do that unless you pay really something like that.
Right.
Like, yeah, man, people will do it if you're paying $35 an hour to go pick fruit. You think you're going to get Americans to do it for $15, $20 an hour, which actually is the wage for those jobs now? You think you're going to get Americans to go do that? Good luck with that. I'm not making a moral argument here, but in terms of how this is likely to play out with Americans, if you wound up having to pay people $30, $35 an hour and that gets passed on to the consumer, how long do you think Americans are going to support these policies once that winds up being the result? You already have the prices at restaurants or beyond. It's collapsing the fast food industry.
Right.
Nobody wants to pay $20 to go to fucking McDonald's for a Big Mac and fries.
Right. So let's take a look at some polling, because she claims that no, the opposition to illegal immigration, the support for deportations is rooted in working class interest for their own economic prospects, higher wages, and the like. So we'll take a look at some of these numbers. So this is brand new polling. Trump administration's program to deport immigrants illegally in the United States. 54% approve, 46% disapprove. So 54% say yes, deport immigrants here illegally. Trump's deportation program is making people in the U.S. safer, less safe, or no change. So 42% say Trump's deportation program is making the U.S. safer, 30% less safe, and 20% no change. Now
27.
let's take a look. 27. Let's take a look now at how many people, as a percentage, feel that these deportations are going to make the economy stronger. Oh, look at that. Only 32%. So Trump's deportation program is making U.S. economy weaker, say 39%. Only 32% say stronger, and 29% say no change. So if 54% approve of mass deportations, but only 32% say it's making the economy stronger, what does that tell you? That tells you that the sentiment behind mass deportations is not for the economic empowerment of working people. They are supporting it because they have been psyoped, just like we got psyoped in the war on terror. That's why I said this is very, very similar to the post 9/11 paranoid hysteria playbook. Many people have been convinced that this is a crime and safety issue. Fear is what wins in this game. Almost 70% of people say that the deportation program is either not influencing the economy at all or making it worse. So you can't then say that people are supporting this on grounds that it's going to improve the prospects of workers. You just can't say that. But don't take this polling as evidence. I want you to take this last piece of evidence into consideration. And I would love to see Batya Ungar-Sargon's response to this, because this was just tweeted out this morning by the man himself, President Donald J. Trump. Our great farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace. In many cases, see, now he adds his cope to it. In many cases, the criminals allowed into our country by the very stupid Biden open borders policy are applying for those jobs. That's completely unfounded. This is not good. We must protect our farmers, but get the criminals out of the USA. Changes are coming. Wow. Wow. So it sounds like Donald Trump here is admitting that, hey,
Say, I've been wanting to get out of the cartel for a long time. I see they're hiring at the hotel. Let's go apply.
yeah, of course that's not happening. Of course that's nonsense. But the first part of that is pretty big news from Donald Trump. Our great farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking good long-time workers away from them. And so changes are coming. So you know who jumped all over this? The aforementioned Governor Gavin Newsom. Turns out chasing hardworking people through ranches and farms and snatching women and children off the streets is not good policy. So he's taking a victory lap on this. And I want to show you Anthony Galley's tweet. There's a notable silence from big MAGA accounts about Trump's post. Yeah, you think? You think? I mean, that kind of pokes a hole in Batya's whole narrative, at least.
Yes.
And I think it's because they're as disappointed as I am in what he may be suggesting. We want to see American wages increase, even if it may come at the expense of big agriculture or leisure. That's not your president, my friend. That's not your president. So there you have Donald Trump come out and just undermine everything she said in one tweet. Hey, we heard from the farmers that they're losing a lot of good workers and the people in the hotel and leisure business, i.e. the maids who clean the rooms for $8 an hour. Yeah, they're losing a lot of great people. So we got to get the criminals out, but changes are coming. There you have it. There you have it. I told you this for going back months and months and months. This is not about increasing wages. Working people's wages are not going to go up as a result of these deportations. That's not what they're about. And I predicted that Donald Trump would not even make that argument. He wouldn't even try to make that argument. They're going to frame this as crime and safety, foreign terrorist gangs. That is what wins. That is what wins. That is why his numbers on this are as high as they were. And if you live through the post 9/11 PSYOP, you know that that is very, very powerful. And it is powerful. That's why his numbers on immigration are as good as they are. 54% still in favor of mass deportations, but not because they think it'll benefit workers, because they've been scared of the brown immigrant, just like after 9/11, they were scared of the Muslim man. That's the play. That's the play. It has nothing to do with economic empowerment. I can't wait to see Batya Ungar-Sargon's take on that tweet. I can't wait for that.
She might just ignore it.
That's what they usually do.
These real grifters, they'll duck stuff that's off a brand.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the dirty reality, because there is a plummeting birth rate throughout the West, which affects the productivity of a society. America has had a uniquely strong GDP relative to other Western industrialized nations because the immigration has been making up for the drop in birth rate. So we've had a more youthful workforce than we would otherwise. Younger people, they work harder, they save up, they buy houses in a way older people don't spend in that way. The problem has not been that. You could argue the immigration is part of what's been keeping us afloat. The problem is something they do not want you talking about, and that's the purpose of scapegoating immigrants. The distribution of wealth is the problem. They are stealing all the money and telling you to get mad at your neighbor because he's got something you don't, or if you got rid of him, you could have what he has. You're not going to have what he has. All these people care about is stealing all of the productivity gains, all of the wealth that comes from those productivity gains, and stuffing it into their own pockets. You're still going to be living that peasant life because that's the only life they afford you. If you get an increase in productivity, they'll take it. They'll steal it. They are slobbering for the AI robotics revolution to displace you. They hate you. They don't even want to have to provide any kind of health care, any kind of nutrition support for your children. They want to exterminate you like a bunch of rats. That is the vision they really have for you. So when you see them getting rid of immigrants alongside instituting policies that are going to kill off huge swaths, and I don't say that lightly, literally, between the healthcare SNAP programs, literally kill off large swaths of the working class. The purpose is to distract you and keep you focused on that so they can keep picking your pocket. When they get rid of these immigrants, as Keaton has pointed out many, many times, if you think the result of that is, you know what, I think we should start paying more for American labor, you're crazy. You're crazy. How do you see it when they increase wages for fast food workers in California? Well, that's going to incentivize them to go to automation. So why don't you think that here?
Right.
Why do you think they're not going to go to automation here? Like, if that's how you think business works, well, then why do you think the result of this, of increasing cost of labor here, especially as we're on the precipice of an AI revolution, is not just going to lead them to redouble their efforts to replace you?
Right. Or they'll just make less shit and charge more for it, as they proved coming out of COVID.
Right.
That's why inflation spiked in the first place, because they were having a hard time getting people to come to work. And so they figured, you know what? We'll just make less of the stuff and we'll charge more for it. And our profits will go up, which they did. Corporate profits surged as inflation surged. They weren't raising prices because they had to, because they just can't find work and no one wants to work. No. They figured, all right, if it's harder to find labor, rather than pay people more to incentivize them to come to work, fuck that. Why do that when we could just make less, charge more, increase our margins, and have record profits? That is what they will do if all else fails. They proved that to you just a few years ago. How could you still be under the impression that once the immigrants leave, it's going to be 1955 here, utopia, it's going to be... Like, that's just fantasy. It's absolute fantasy. I want to play a piece of, I want to do some shameless self-promotion here before we wrap this segment and play a little piece of the Misty Winston show from last night where she had author, journalist, and filmmaker Derek Brose on. He talked about this issue in a way that I thought was pretty great. So you can catch the full interview. It's on Rumble now. We will be clipping parts of it for the YouTube and the Rumble channel in the coming days. But let's take a quick look at this.
These folks use, this predator class use, is to present the people. One of the tactics that these folks use, this predator class use, is to present the people, whether that's the United States or on an international scale, or even sometimes just, you know, in smaller situations, with choices where neither of them are good for us. You know, one example of this is the immigration situation, which is obviously the main focus with a lot of people right now, with the LA situation and the way Palantir is being used. But you have a situation where there's clearly has been, you know, some problems with immigration. It's not just crazed right-wingers who are saying it, but then at the same time, they do exaggerate a lot. They repeat a lot of false talking points that immigrants are eating your dogs and these kinds of different things. And so you end up with a situation where the right wing watches the Biden years and they're like, this doesn't make sense. I'm seeing, you know, illegal immigrants cause crimes, and those stories are amplified. They're real in some cases, but they're definitely amplified and exaggerated and just, you know, replayed over and over for clickbait. And so for 4 years, people are pumped up with that fear, and all a person like Trump has to do is come along and say, hey, I'm going to be better. I'm going to fix that. And if that means we have to have the biggest deportation operation ever, they're like, yes, finally, the strong man I've been needing is going to come along and save the day. And so his solution is more militarization, surveillance, police state measures. Those of us who are kind of stepping back and watching all of it with a little bit of principle, and I don't, you know, whether you're left, right, center, whatever you identify as, like, we can clearly see this isn't the answer. But at the same time, maybe doing nothing and just, you know, allowing immigration to be used in this way isn't the answer either. And so you kind of get where either alleged solution being presented to us are not going to lead to long-term liberty and a better society that I think many of us are fighting for. But so doing nothing isn't the answer. Embracing tyranny and technocracy isn't the answer. But that's essentially the paths that are being laid out before us. It's like, okay, you can support this side and pretend like everything's fine and there's nothing going on. Or you can support this side and embrace tyranny.
Yeah, that is basically the choice that you have. And that is the choice that the people were presented with from their perspective in 2024, which is why Trump's numbers on this issue were as strong as they were. They still remain fairly strong despite all this, not as strong as they were. He's underwater in certain polls on the way he's handling the deportations. But the reason that people have been convinced that these are necessary is exactly what he's talking about. You have a neoliberal, business-friendly Democratic Party who likes the effects of increased migration. And then you have the bad cop side, fascists, who are willing to exploit this for their own end. Neither of those paths leads to the empowerment of working people. Neither of them. Neither of them. And so I thought that was well said. And by the way, you see our logo in the upper right-hand corner. That's the Misty Winston Show, for those who don't know. That airs every Wednesday at 8 o'clock on Rumble and X, and we drop clips to Twitter. But go follow our Rumble channel if you want to watch those live. That entire interview is up on Rumble right now.
Yep. And Misty will be guest hosting for Mr. Jimmy Dore next Friday.
That's right. Misty's going to be guest hosting for Jimmy Dore next Friday. That's going to be really cool. That's exciting. That's exciting. That'll be a lot of fun.
Please clap.